when someone walks away and acts like you were easy to replace. They move on fast and sleep peacefully while you replay everything. You realize you gave more than you received. You feel invisible after giving your loyalty. You question your value because they did not choose you. This is how to actually make people regret losing you without playing games. You invested your time, your energy, your protection, your commitment, and now you are left with questions. Was I not enough? Why was I replaced so fast? Did any of it matter? Stay with me, because the way you handle this moment will define the rest of your life. Comment: I choose growth. Number 1. Remove your access. You are not suffering because they left. You are suffering because they still have access to you while giving you nothing in return, and you are allowing it. You check your phone hoping for their name to appear. You reply fast even after being ignored for hours. You watch their stories the second they post. You keep the door slightly open just in case they change their mind, and you call this hope. But it is attachment without discipline, and discipline is the foundation of strength. You say you want them to regret losing you, but you are still emotionally available at a discount. You are still providing validation, comfort, attention and reassurance without commitment. And as long as you remain accessible, you remove the possibility of absence. And absence is the only thing that forces reflection. People do not miss what is constantly available. They miss what is no longer reachable. And right now you are reachable, predictable, emotionally on standby, and that kills any chance of them feeling the weight of losing you. So the first brutal truth you accept is this: if someone chooses to walk away, you do not make it easier for them to experience you. You make it harder, not through games, but through standards. You delete the chat, not out of anger, but out of clarity. You mute their social media, not because you are weak, but because you value your focus. You stop checking if they are online. You stop asking mutual friends what they are doing. You stop creating imaginary scenarios in your head where they suddenly realize your worth. Because every minute you spend monitoring them is a minute you are not building yourself. And that is self-betrayal. And self-betrayal is the real loss. Have you noticed how quickly someone moves on when they know you are still emotionally available? They feel secure in the idea that you are there if their new situation fails. You become the backup plan, the emotional safety net, the convenient option, and nothing destroys attraction faster than convenience without challenge. So you remove your access fully. You stop being the therapist. You stop being the emotional support system. You stop being the late-night comfort call. You become unavailable in a calm and grounded way. You do not announce it. You do not threaten it. You embody it, because true strength does not need explanation. And this is where Stoic discipline enters your life. You wake up and instead of reaching for your phone, you reach for control. You sit with discomfort without reacting. You observe the urge to text them and you let it pass. You train your mind the same way you train your body. Repetition builds resilience, and resilience builds power, and power creates detachment, and detachment is freedom. You realize that craving their attention is not love, but dependency, and dependency gives the other person leverage over your emotional state, and once someone has leverage over you, they do not respect you fully, so you remove that leverage. You remove yourself from the dynamic completely. You focus on what you control, which is your habits, your time, your body, your income, your mindset. And every time the urge to check on them appears, you redirect it into action. You go to the gym, you read, you build a skill, you write down your long-term goals and break them into daily tasks. You become so occupied with progress that you no longer have time to track someone who chose not to choose you. And here is the uncomfortable part you must face. If they left easily, they were already emotionally detaching before you noticed. And instead of seeing that clearly, you kept overgiving, hoping to secure their presence. But overgiving without boundaries signals low self-respect, and low self-respect never inspires regret. It inspires dismissal. So you rebuild your self-respect by enforcing distance. You treat access to you as a privilege, not a right. You understand that your attention is valuable currency, and you stop spending it where there is no return. You train yourself to be comfortable with solitude because solitude strengthens identity, and identity builds unshakable confidence. And once you no longer fear being alone, you stop tolerating being treated as optional. And this is the turning point, because the moment you genuinely withdraw emotionally and physically, something shifts. They feel the gap. They notice your absence in small moments, the lack of your reassurance, the lack of your presence, the lack of your consistency. And humans are wired to recognize loss when something reliable disappears. But this only works if your withdrawal is real, not strategic, not temporary, not performative. Real detachment means you are not secretly hoping they come back. You are redirecting your life entirely. You stop centering them in your narrative. You stop defining your worth by their choice. You understand that rejection is information, not condemnation, and you use that information to upgrade yourself. You analyze your weaknesses honestly. You improve your communication, your leadership in relationships, your emotional regulation, your financial stability, your physical health, not to win them back, but to become undeniable in every future interaction. And when you do this consistently, your energy changes, your posture changes, your tone changes, your standards rise, and people sense that shift immediately, including the one who left. Because absence combined with growth creates contrast, and contrast forces comparison, and comparison awakens realization, and realization is the birthplace of regret. But by the time that regret appears, you are no longer waiting for it. You are too focused on your expansion, and that is the real victory, because the goal is not to manipulate someone into missing you. The goal is to elevate yourself so high that anyone who walks away understands exactly what they forfeited, and even if they never admit it, you know it. And that knowledge builds quiet strength, and that strength becomes your new identity. And from that identity, you no longer chase, you select, you no longer beg, you evaluate, you no longer fear loss, you expect alignment. And everything begins with removing your access completely and reclaiming your focus, your time, your energy, and your direction without apology and without hesitation. And if this is the moment you decide to reclaim your focus, your time, your energy, and your direction without apology and without hesitation, then the Stoic Relationship Blueprint ebook for men is the structured guide that shows you exactly how to do it step by step, using timeless Stoic principles that build discipline, detachment, confidence, and unshakable self-respect. It answers the questions running through your head at night. How do I stop overthinking? How do I stop chasing? How do I rebuild after rejection? How do I become emotionally steady no matter what happens? And it gives you practical frameworks you can apply immediately. The audiobook version is now available, so you can absorb this life-changing knowledge while walking, training, driving, or clearing your mind instead of replaying the past. It's linked in the comments, and once it's yours, it's always yours, meaning you will always have access to these principles whenever life tests you again. This is not just a book. It is a permanent upgrade to how you think, choose, and lead your life from this point forward. Number 2, stop explaining your worth. You are tired because you keep trying to prove something that should never require proof. You keep explaining your intentions, clarifying your loyalty, defending your character, listing what you have done, reminding them how much you care, hoping logic will change emotion, hoping effort will create appreciation. But value that needs persuasion is already discounted, And the more you argue for your importance, the more you position yourself as someone seeking approval rather than someone setting standards. And that dynamic slowly shifts power away from you, because the person who is trying to convince is the person who fears loss more, and the one who fears loss more always bends more, gives more, tolerates more, and over time you begin shrinking yourself just to maintain connection. You soften your boundaries, you ignore disrespect, you rationalize inconsistency, you tell yourself they are just confused or stressed or overwhelmed, but deep down you know you are negotiating your dignity, and every time you over-explain, you teach the other person that your presence is something to be debated rather than respected. And this is where you must become brutally honest with yourself. You do not lose someone because you lack value. You lose someone because you keep trying to demonstrate value to someone who is not aligned with it. And alignment cannot be forced through explanation. It reveals itself through action. If someone needs constant reminders of your worth, they are not blind. They are unconvinced, and chasing conviction drains your strength. So you stop. You step back internally. You observe instead of reacting. You speak less and assess more. You let silence communicate confidence. Not because you are cold, but because you are grounded. You understand that the person who is secure does not need to persuade others to stay. They simply set standards and allow others to rise or fall based on their own choices. And this is where Stoic discipline becomes practical in your life. You separate what you control from what you do not. You control your behavior, your integrity, your effort, your direction, but you do not control someone else's feelings, readiness, or capacity. And once you accept that truth fully, you stop trying to manage perceptions. You stop performing for validation. You stop over-investing in someone who is under-invested in you. And instead of reacting emotionally when you feel misunderstood, you respond with composure. You ask yourself why their opinion holds so much weight in your mind. You identify the insecurity driving your need to be seen a certain way, and you work on that insecurity directly. If you fear being alone, you build comfort in solitude. If you fear not being enough, you build competence in your craft, your health, your finances, your leadership. You become so solid internally that external approval becomes optional, and this shift changes everything. Because when you no longer need to convince anyone of your value, your behavior becomes calm and decisive. If someone questions your intentions, you clarify once and move forward. If someone disrespects your standards, you remove yourself without drama. You do not beg to be understood. You do not chase closure. You do not argue in circles. You recognize patterns quickly and you act accordingly. And here is the part that challenges you deeply. You must examine the moments where you ignored red flags early on, the times you sensed misalignment but stayed anyway because you were attached to potential. You projected depth where there was only surface. You filled gaps with hope. And then when things collapse, you try to explain your loyalty as if loyalty alone guarantees reciprocity. But loyalty without discernment is self-sabotage. So you refine your standards. You write down exactly what you will and will not tolerate. You define what consistency looks like, what effort looks like, what communication looks like, and you measure actions against those standards without emotional bias, because clarity protects you from over-explaining. And when someone pulls away, you resist the urge to chase with paragraphs and emotional appeals. Instead, you maintain composure. You let their actions speak, and you focus on strengthening your own path. And as you do this, something powerful happens. Your energy becomes different. You no longer seek reassurance. You no longer overanalyze every text. You no longer feel the need to defend your character to someone who already decided how they see you. And that shift creates psychological distance, because people are accustomed to emotional reactions. They expect you to argue, to plead, to justify. But when you respond with quiet confidence and decisive movement forward, It disrupts their expectations, and that disruption creates reflection. They begin to reassess not because you forced them to, but because your absence of persuasion highlights your self-respect. And even if they never return, you gain something greater. You gain alignment with yourself. You stop betraying your own standards for temporary attachment. You stop seeking validation from someone who is uncertain about you, and you redirect that energy into mastery of your own life. You build skills that increase your options. You improve your physical health so your presence communicates discipline. You refine your communication so your words carry weight. You expand your network so your world becomes bigger than one person's opinion, and gradually you feel the internal shift from seeking approval to embodying value. And once you embody value, you do not need to announce it. It shows in how you walk away from low effort. It shows in how you protect your time. It shows in how you choose partners based on alignment rather than chemistry alone. And this is the transformation. Because the goal is not to make someone feel guilty for losing you. The goal is to become so centered and self-assured that you never again feel compelled to prove your worth to someone who should already recognize it. And when you operate from that place, regret, if it comes, is a byproduct, not a pursuit, and your life moves forward with clarity, strength, and standards that cannot be negotiated. Number 3, upgrade your life. Pain becomes fuel the moment responsibility replaces blame, and the day the relationship ends is the day excuses end as well, because growth now becomes the only logical direction forward, and most people waste this moment by obsessing over what the other person is doing while their own life remains stagnant, scrolling through updates, comparing timelines, imagining replacements, replaying conversations, analyzing tone, dissecting every detail as if more thinking will restore control. But thinking without action deepens weakness, and weakness quietly erodes self-respect, and self-respect is the foundation of attraction and power in every area of life. So the shift begins with radical ownership, not of their choices but of personal standards, habits, and direction. Because attraction is rarely lost in a single moment. It erodes slowly through complacency, emotional dependence, lack of purpose, inconsistency, poor physical discipline, financial instability, or tolerating disrespect. And this truth is uncomfortable but freeing, because what can be improved can be rebuilt, and rebuilding starts immediately, body first, because the body reflects discipline, waking up earlier even when sleep feels heavy, training with intensity even when motivation is absent, eating with intention instead of impulse, removing alcohol excess, cutting late-night distractions, committing to visible strength, because visible strength changes posture, breathing, eye contact, tone, and presence. And presence communicates confidence before a single word is spoken. Then finances, because dependency reduces options, and options create leverage, increasing income through skill stacking, learning high-value abilities, studying sales, marketing, coding, trade skills, investing principles, reading daily instead of consuming shallow entertainment, building something tangible that increases autonomy, because autonomy breeds calm, and calm commands respect. Then mindset, because without mental discipline, external upgrades collapse, observing thoughts instead of obeying them, catching self-pity narratives early, replacing victim language with solution language, refusing to say life is unfair and instead asking what is controllable right now, writing clear one-year goals, breaking them into quarterly targets, turning those into weekly non-negotiable tasks, tracking execution daily, reviewing progress every Sunday without emotional drama, adjusting strategy without quitting, building a routine that does not depend on mood, because mood is unstable and discipline is reliable. And while this transformation unfolds, something subtle happens. Attention shifts away from who left and toward who is being built. Energy that once fueled anxiety now fuels momentum, and momentum compounds. Improved fitness increases confidence. Increased confidence improves social presence. Improved presence attracts higher quality connections. Higher quality connections raise standards further, and standards filter out misalignment faster, creating a new baseline for relationships. And this is where introspection deepens, asking honestly what patterns repeated in past relationships. Over-pursuing, ignoring red flags, prioritizing chemistry over character, mistaking intensity for compatibility, tolerating inconsistency, abandoning personal mission for validation, identifying each pattern and writing corrective rules. No chasing unclear interest. No investing heavily without reciprocity. No compromising core values for temporary affection. No shrinking ambitions to appear less intimidating, because long-term respect requires visible direction, and direction requires mission. So mission becomes central. Defining a purpose beyond dating. Building something larger than emotional approval, whether business, career excellence, creative mastery, physical peak condition, leadership in community, because individuals anchored to purpose radiate stability, and stability creates attraction without effort. And here is the controversial truth. Attraction often fades when comfort replaces challenge and ambition stagnates. So complacency is the silent destroyer, and preventing it requires continuous self-expansion, learning new skills quarterly, setting physical performance goals, increasing social competence, improving communication clarity, reading philosophy and applying principles immediately, practicing restraint in arguments, maintaining mystery through independence, spending intentional time alone to sharpen identity, because independence signals abundance, and abundance shifts relational dynamics permanently, and as upgrades compound, encounters change. Former partners may notice indirectly through mutual circles or subtle updates, but that is no longer the focus. The focus becomes internal validation earned through consistent execution, waking up knowing the day is structured around growth rather than rumination, feeling strength in the body that once felt heavy with rejection, experiencing pride in financial improvements that once felt out of reach, recognizing emotional reactions that once controlled behavior now dissolve faster because awareness interrupts them, and that awareness is trained daily through reflection, journaling nightly about wins, mistakes, emotional triggers, adjusting behavior consciously, because unexamined patterns repeat automatically, and repetition without reflection guarantees stagnation. But disciplined reflection accelerates evolution, and over months the identity shifts completely, no longer defined by who left, but by who is being built, no longer seeking validation from one person, but attracting options through competence and composure. And even if the past partner never expresses regret, the upgrade itself creates an undeniable contrast. And contrast is powerful because humans instinctively evaluate what was lost when visible growth occurs. But by that stage, attachment has dissolved, replaced by clarity and standards that are no longer negotiable, and the greatest transformation reveals itself quietly. Emotional stability under pressure, refusal to overreact, refusal to over-explain, refusal to abandon mission for temporary comfort. And that stability becomes magnetic, not because it is performed, but because it is earned. And this is how life turns in favor of the disciplined, by converting pain into structured action, by converting rejection into refinement, by converting emotional chaos into deliberate growth. And from that position, relationships become a complement, not a necessity. Choice replaces desperation, abundance replaces fear, and the person who once felt discarded now stands upgraded, focused, self-directed, and fully capable of building a future that no longer revolves around anyone who failed to recognize value in the first place. Number 4. Master emotional control. Emotional control separates those who react from those who lead their own lives, and right now emotions attempt to control behavior, thoughts replay conversations at night, anger rises when imagining them moving on, jealousy appears when picturing someone else in your place, pride wants to prove something, sadness wants reassurance, and without discipline these emotions dictate actions that lower your position. Impulsive texts, long explanations, dramatic confrontations, social media reactions designed to provoke attention. But every reaction signals that your internal state depends on their behavior, and dependency removes power immediately. So control begins with awareness, noticing the surge of emotion without acting on it, recognizing the urge to respond instantly, and choosing delay instead, breathing slowly when triggered rather than escalating, because strength is measured in restraint, not noise, and the person who remains steady under emotional pressure becomes unpredictable in a way that commands respect, while the reactive person becomes predictable and therefore easy to manage. And many relationships deteriorate not because feelings vanish, but because emotional instability erodes safety, and safety is built through consistency and composure. So mastering control means training yourself daily, not only when conflict appears but in ordinary moments, waking up and sitting quietly for 10 minutes observing thoughts pass without attaching to them, building the ability to watch an emotion arise and fall without obeying it, practicing delayed gratification in small habits, such as resisting the urge to check messages immediately, finishing tasks before entertainment, holding posture even when tired, because micro-discipline compounds into macro-stability, and stability becomes visible in your tone, your pacing, your decisions. And when someone attempts to provoke jealousy or test your reaction through subtle comments or public displays, you remain grounded, not cold, not passive. Grounded because grounded individuals are not controlled by external stimuli, and this forces a psychological shift in the dynamic, since expected reactions do not occur, and when predictable emotional patterns break, reflection begins on the other side, but this only works when detachment is genuine, not performative. And to achieve genuine detachment, you must confront the underlying fear driving your reactions. Fear of being replaced, fear of inadequacy, fear of abandonment, fear of starting over, writing each fear down, analyzing its origin, challenging its validity through evidence from your own life achievements, because fear loses intensity when examined rationally, and rational examination is a core practice of Stoic discipline, separating imagination from reality, recognizing that mental scenarios often exaggerate outcomes, and grounding yourself in what is verifiably true in the present moment. And from that grounded position, you respond strategically rather than emotionally. You decide whether communication serves your standards. You choose silence when engagement offers no benefit. You walk away from disrespect without dramatic exit speeches. You refuse to argue endlessly in circles seeking validation, because validation gained through emotional outbursts is temporary and weak, while validation gained through composure is lasting and influential. And mastering control also means eliminating behaviors that destabilize you physically and mentally, reducing excessive alcohol, limiting late-night rumination, maintaining consistent sleep, training your body regularly to regulate stress, because physical discipline supports emotional regulation. And as these habits solidify your internal baseline shifts, emotional waves become smaller, reactions become slower, decisions become clearer, and from this state you evaluate relationships differently. You notice inconsistency faster. You address issues calmly instead of suppressing them. You express boundaries without hostility, and if those boundaries are dismissed, you withdraw without chaos, because chaos benefits no one. And over time, this controlled presence creates a powerful contrast between your current identity and the reactive version of yourself that once chased reassurance, and that contrast alone transforms how others perceive you. Not because you are trying to appear strong, but because you have built strength through repetition and discipline, and this mastery extends beyond relationships into career, friendships, family dynamics. Because emotional stability is universally respected, leaders are trusted because they remain composed when circumstances change. And by cultivating that same composure, you elevate every area of life. And here is the deeper truth. Regret often arises not from losing affection, but from losing stability. And stability comes from emotional control. And when someone realizes that the calm center they once relied on is no longer accessible, awareness grows. But whether or not they express that awareness becomes irrelevant, because the ultimate reward is internal. Freedom from impulsive reactions, freedom from obsessive thoughts, freedom from emotional dependency. And that freedom allows you to pursue goals without distraction, to make decisions aligned with long-term vision rather than short-term feeling, to remain focused when tempted by drama, to protect your peace intentionally. And as you maintain this standard consistently, you become selective about who gains access to your emotional world, recognizing that access is earned through consistency and mutual respect. And once emotional control becomes habitual, life transforms from reactive survival to deliberate direction, and from that position, regret from others becomes a side effect rather than the objective, because the true victory lies in becoming unshakable under pressure and fully sovereign over your internal state. Number 5. Move on for real. Real movement begins when attachment ends internally, not when contact stops externally, because many claim to move on while still mentally negotiating with the past, replaying memories, imagining alternate endings, hoping timing will magically change outcomes. But hidden hope keeps you emotionally tied, and emotional ties keep your behavior subtly aligned with the possibility of return. And as long as you operate from possibility instead of acceptance, your growth remains limited. So true detachment requires full acknowledgement that the chapter is closed, not temporarily paused, not awaiting revision, closed. And this acceptance is painful because it removes illusion, and illusion feels safer than uncertainty. Yet uncertainty is where expansion lives, and moving on for real means withdrawing emotional investment from someone who chose a different path, and reinvesting that energy into building a future independent of their validation. It means deleting fantasies of reunion and replacing them with structured plans for personal evolution. It means noticing when thoughts drift back to what they are doing and redirecting that mental energy towards skill development, fitness, financial strategy, creative output, community building. Because focus determines direction, and direction determines outcome, and if focus remains on the past, the future remains underdeveloped. So you discipline your attention deliberately. Each time nostalgia surfaces, you label it as memory, not mandate. Each time regret appears, you analyze lessons instead of indulging self-pity, writing down mistakes made, identifying patterns tolerated, defining non-negotiables for future relationships, and committing to enforce them without compromise. Because without defined standards, history repeats automatically, and moving on also requires emotional honesty, admitting where you compromised values for comfort, where you ignored intuition to maintain connection, where you overinvested in potential rather than consistent action, and acknowledging these truths without self-condemnation allows growth instead of resentment, because resentment keeps you tied just as tightly as longing does. And Stoic discipline guides this phase through acceptance of reality as it stands rather than as desired, focusing on controllable actions today rather than hypothetical reconciliations tomorrow, training the mind daily to release attachment to outcomes beyond your influence, strengthening identity through habits aligned with long-term vision, creating routines that build pride independent of relationship status, waking early, training the body, reviewing goals, executing tasks, limiting distractions, cultivating competence, and gradually the emotional intensity fades, not because time passes, but because attention shifts. And as attention shifts, self-respect increases, and with increased self-respect, standards elevate, and elevated standards transform how you evaluate future partners, no longer impressed by surface charm alone, but attentive to consistency, integrity, shared values, long-term alignment. Because moving on for real is not merely forgetting someone, it is upgrading the criteria that determine who gains access to your life. And this upgrade changes relational dynamics permanently, because you no longer approach connection from scarcity, but from abundance created through self-development, and abundance dissolves desperation. And without desperation, decisions become rational, boundaries become firm, communication becomes direct. And when someone tests those boundaries, you do not argue extensively, you observe behavior and act accordingly, removing yourself if necessary without drama, because protecting peace becomes priority over proving worth. And this internal shift often triggers external reactions. Former partners may sense the emotional distance and attempt to re-engage, but genuine detachment evaluates such attempts objectively rather than emotionally, asking whether alignment truly exists or whether nostalgia is influencing judgment, and choosing based on evidence rather than longing. And even if no re-engagement occurs, the transformation remains valuable, because your life trajectory no longer depends on one person's recognition. Instead, it depends on your commitment to disciplined growth, and that commitment compounds into confidence that cannot be shaken by rejection. And from this foundation, relationships become additions, not necessities. Companionship becomes choice, not survival. And if someone leaves again, the impact is lighter because identity remains intact. And that is the ultimate freedom, emotional independence grounded in purpose, structure, and self-respect. And when this state is achieved, regret from others becomes irrelevant, because fulfillment no longer hinges on external validation. Yet paradoxically, this independence often increases perceived value, as humans naturally gravitate toward those who are self-contained and mission-driven, and whether or not anyone acknowledges the loss, you recognize your evolution clearly, and that recognition fuels continued progress, creating a life defined by direction rather than distraction, standards rather than compromise, growth rather than rumination. And this is what moving on for real truly means. Not erasing the past, but integrating its lessons. Not denying pain, but converting it into strength. Not seeking to be missed, but becoming so aligned with purpose that anyone who once walked away understands, silently or openly, that they stepped away from someone who refused to remain stagnant and chose transformation instead. This is the line most people never cross, because staying distracted is easier than becoming disciplined, and society benefits from you being confused, reactive, and emotionally dependent instead of focused, grounded, and self-led. But the moment you choose growth over comfort, everything changes. And if you are ready to stop repeating the same relationship patterns and start operating from strength, the Stoic Relationship Blueprint ebook for men is your next move, filled with timeless Stoic principles that immediately sharpen your mind, raise your standards, and rebuild your identity from the inside out. And it is now available in audiobook form, so you can listen while walking, training, or driving, instead of replaying old memories in your head. It is linked in the comments, and once you own it, this knowledge is yours for life. So comment "No more regret" if you are ready to upgrade like this video, and subscribe so more men find these truths before they waste years learning them the hard way.